History often remembers kings, warriors, conquerors, but the history of Wales remembers another name. Not because he built an empire, not because he led an army, but because he called a nation back to God. His name was David. Nearly 15 centuries after his death, he remains the patron saint of Wales. Yet the true measure of David's life is found not in legend, but in the remarkable generation God raised around him. History remembers Saint David. Faith remembers the God who prepared him. The Roman Empire had disappeared. Its forts stood empty. Its governors were gone. Yet Christianity remained across Wales. Small communities quietly gathered, families prayed, scripture was taught. Children learned the stories of Christ. Without army, without wealth. The church survived because ordinary believers remained faithful. Sometimes the greatest movements of God begin long before anyone notices. Much about David's early life comes from traditions written centuries later. Separating history from legend requires careful study. Yet the broad picture is remarkably clear. David was born into a generation rebuilding Wales after Rome. He would become part of a remarkable network of teachers, missionaries, and monasteries that transformed an entire nation. Before David led others invested in David. Among the greatest teachers of the age was Illtud. His monastery became one of the finest centers of Christian learning in Western Europe. Students came not merely to study scripture, but to learn discipline, service, humility, and prayer. The church was preparing a generation. God was preparing Wales. David's greatness was never measured by wealth. His communities rejected luxury. Monks worked with their hands. They farmed, prayed, copied scripture, served their neighbors. David believed spiritual authority grew from obedience rather than power. Rome had measured greatness by conquest. David measured greatness by holiness. By the middle of the 6th century, Christianity in Wales had survived the fall of Rome. But survival alone was not enough. The church now faced a different challenge. False teaching had begun to spread. Questions about the nature of Christ and the authority of the church threatened to divide communities that had endured generations of hardship. Welsh leaders recognized that unity would not come through political power or military strength. It would require wisdom rooted in Scripture and lives shaped by holiness. So bishops, abbots, and teachers gathered at a place known as Brefi, in the heart of Wales. History remembers this gathering as the Synod of Brefi. It was here that David stepped onto the national stage. The earliest account of the synod comes from the life of Saint David, written by Rigi Farsh nearly 5 centuries later. Like many medieval biographies of the saints, it blends history with tradition, making it difficult to separate every historical detail from devotional storytelling. One tradition tells us that as David began to preach, those gathered at the back of the crowd could neither see nor hear him. Then the ground beneath him miraculously rose into a hill, lifting him above the assembly, while a white dove descended upon his shoulder, a sign of God's favor. Whether understood as literal history, symbolic tradition, or a story expressing the profound impact of David's ministry, the message is unmistakable. His voice was heard. David did not speak with the authority of kings. He possessed no army. He held no earthly office that could compel obedience. His authority came from something far more enduring: years of prayer, years of discipline, years spent serving quietly before ever speaking publicly. When David stood before the people of Wales, they were not simply hearing a gifted speaker. They were listening to a life that had already become the message. The Synod marked a turning point. David's counsel was embraced, his leadership recognized. His example became a model for churches throughout Wales. He would eventually become bishop at Menevia, today known simply as St. David's, where a humble monastic community would become one of the most influential centers of Christian life in Britain. History often celebrates moments of dramatic victory. But the lasting triumph at Brefi was not won by force. It was won through faithfulness. God had spent years preparing one servant so that when the moment arrived, a nation would be ready to listen. The hill of Brefi, whether understood as miracle or sacred memory, points beyond itself to a greater truth. God delights in lifting humble servants whose lives are firmly rooted in Him. And when He raises a voice, it is not for the glory of the speaker, but for the good of His people. David never ruled a kingdom. He commanded no armies. He left behind no palace. Yet his influence has endured for nearly 1,500 years, because history measures greatness differently than God. History remembers those who possessed power. God remembers those who remained faithful. The story of St. David reminds us that the future of a nation is often shaped quietly, through prayer, through faithful teaching, through lives surrendered to Christ. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of Christianity in Wales. If this story has encouraged you, I invite you to like, subscribe, and continue with us as we uncover the remarkable people, places, and events that shape the faith of a nation. Next time, the Celtic Church, monasteries that changed the world. Until then, remember, history remembers what happened. Faith remembers the God who was at work.